Hi, I'm Emily.
And I'm Clark.
On Sailing Vessel Temptress.
If you're going to spend any real time on your boat, you need an awning. It protects you from the sun, it protects you from the rain, it makes your life easier and you have a bigger place to live in.
Today we're going to talk about why you need an awning, what makes a great awning. We'll give you a tour of our dragon wing awning and we'll tell you how to make one yourself.
So, why do you need an awning on a boat?
To live on a boat is essentially to live outside, and here in the tropics that means it's going to be bright, it's going to be hot, and sometimes it's going to be very rainy. So an awning is going to protect you from all those things. The sun is great, but you're going to get lots of sun just walking to town to get your groceries or being out in your dinghy. So when you're on your boat, you want it to be nice and cool and shady, so it's going to protect you from that sun. Heat is going to come in through your decks and really heat up your living space, so being able to cast a nice shadow over the majority of your deck is going to keep it cooler down below. And lastly, it is going to rain, so having an awning is going to protect you from excess water getting in your boat, but it's also going to allow you a really efficient way to collect that water and divert it into your water tanks or into containers, whatever you want to do with that water. So an awning protects you from the elements. And in addition, it gives you a cool place to hang out. It expands your living space and makes your boat feel bigger. Having an effective awning starts with a good design, so let's talk to Clark about what makes a good awning.
Let's start by talking about what not to do with an awning. Just taking a rectangle of cloth and stretching it out, I mean, it'll keep the sun off, but it has other problems. It tends to flop a lot. It is hard to get right where you want it to be, and it's just not the greatest thing. Some people try to use the worst thing, which is that blue tarp stuff you get at Home Depot. That doesn't hold up at all, and it makes a mess when it starts breaking up into little pieces. Here are some common failures you see with people's awnings. First one is obstruction. I personally have a sore back and I need to stand up and walk around. But there's a lot of awnings around that you have to crawl under or move around the outside of the boat or something. They do a really good job of protecting the deck from sunlight, but now you can't use that space. And this is all your living space. The other problem is durability. If you pick a material that doesn't hold up in the sun, you're going to be replacing it all the time. It's just not durable. If you mount that awning such that it touches something like the sail cover or going over the boom, it can, when it vibrates and gets flopped around by the wind, it can actually chafe into your mainsail. It would be really sad to have your awning destroy your several $1,000 mainsail. You can't have an awning that's actually destructive to your boat. Awnings that aren't designed right can be loud. They will flop around in the wind and they can make a tremendous racket, particularly that plastic stuff. Also, aesthetics count. And having an awning that looks good on your boat and you're proud to have up all the time, well, that's got some points to it too. Finally, you should really consider where you're going to store this awning. Awnings, by their very nature, can't be up when you're sailing. They're big. So you've got to have a plan for where to put them when they're not up. In the 90s, before I went out cruising, I decided I wanted a serious awning. And I put some real thought into how to make that one that would hold up. I designed it, built it. I made one terrible error. I thought, what'll I make it out of? Well, nylon folds up really good, and they make hot air balloons out of nylon. I was in Seattle where you can buy anything, and I bought the fabric that a hot air balloon company was using. Well, it was great, and it did fold up real small, but within 2 years, the fabric failed. They don't store those in the sun. Then I did one out of Sunbrella, and that lasted for 20 years, and it finally gave up in the sun after 20 years. That was well worth it. We just rebuilt this one. So this is a brand new one, well, brand new as in 3 years old, new to us in a way. Emily refers to this as the dragon wing awning, and I think it's a fitting marketing term. She likes that stuff. It has these struts across that kind of look like the bones in a dragon's wing, and all of the straight lines are hollow cut. That keeps them from flopping and chafing, but again, it looks like a dragon's wing. So I think that's a fitting name for it. This awning is excellent. It's huge. It protects a lot of the boat. I can walk around under it at 6 foot without a problem. And It's built to be a bit of a lifting structure. It actually attempts to lift temptress out of the water when the wind blows really hard. Well, it fails miserably, of course, but in lifting, it pulls on all of its shrouds in a way, you'll see the details later, that actually pulls it tighter and outward. So the stronger the wind blows, the tighter it gets automatically, and it self-adjusts. Well, this is made out of Sunbrella. Sunbrella is an acrylic. I've bought other materials that did not hold up as well. I bought other materials that claim to be acrylic, and probably are, but whatever they do to Sunbrella coatings, whatever, it seems worth it. I've also, and you gotta watch this on eBay, bought Sunbrella that wasn't Sunbrella. Sunbrella is very expensive. We do have a way of getting a pretty deep discount. We share it with our patrons. If you want to go over there, if you're going to buy a whole bunch, it'll be well worth it. But I do recommend spending the money on Sunbrella. Usually I don't. Usually I like to do things cheap. Nylon webbing all around the outside. I put the nylon webbing on the bottom with the Sunbrella cloth over the top because the Sunbrella is better in the sun than the nylon is. We have struts made out of aluminum. I've tried lots of things. The two things that worked out the best were aluminum tubing that you can get from like where welders buy their metal, really quite inexpensively, and easy to get everywhere. Just have to look a bit and find the right place. And then wooden doweling, big diameter wooden doweling. That worked quite well too. The aluminum is lighter, it's cheaper, it's easier to get. And if you had trouble storing the whole strut, you can cut it right in half and put a wooden plug or some other piece in the middle so that when it comes together, it can come apart and you can store them as two parts. So after many years of trying, I recommend this. We're using 1.5 inches. You want a strut that is stiff and strong, but will flex. Basically 20 or 30 pounds in the middle will cause it to flex enough that rain will slough off it. You could go with this size, maybe a little smaller. This size was quite stiff and I actually kind of pre-bent it a little bit. And that worked too. Okay, let's take a look at the struts. This came out quite well. So the awning has grommets in the edges of it where the struts are. And this is just a piece of paracord in this case. I'd suggest a little bit bigger than 550 paracord. 3-strand Dacron I used before, it was perfect. This does chafe after a couple of years. Anyway, it goes out, around, and we'll go into the detail of the strut, back into the strut pocket and downward. And when you pull down, that pulls the cloth outward. And it's kind of got a 2-to-1 purchase, and that keeps it tight. If this was out when it was blowing 20 knots, this would just be drum tight. It works really, really well. Another thing that's of note here is this hem is hollow cut. It's not a straight line. It comes back in from straight and it has a turn to it. Just like the back edge of your sails between the battens, you need this hollow cut and that keeps it from flopping. And that'll last quite a while. Another thing that's important is this leech line. I just hemmed it right into the hollow cut when I hemmed it over, and it's just a piece of string. I used a Dyneema knockoff here, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, UH, all those letters. Having that here lets you do a couple things. If this starts to flop as it ages, just like with your mainsail, you can just pull on this a bit and tie it off. And that will add just a little more tension because remember the string would like to go straight so it pulls outward and that keeps it from flopping. Or if you pull on it really hard, you can get it to actually curve upwards. And that curve upwards goes with the next thing I want to show you. This is a grommet I've just put into the cloth in an opportune place. So if I pull on the leech line and I just attach a hose, the weight of the hose holds it down just ever so bit. This keeps the water from running off the edge and water will accumulate. And then the weight of the water will hold it down even more and the water will travel down the hose and we can take the water from the awning and put it right into our tanks. This is a big awning. When you get some rain, when you get an inch of rain, we're full. It just fills us right up. It's just a cheap, easy way to get water. And water as expensive as it's become here to have delivered to your boat, this has been a big savings. So let's take a minute to talk about how it raises up, how it becomes an awning. First off, if we're traveling a short distance, we just wrap it around its own struts and leave it at its full width. Put it down on the deck. I put it right down where I store the spinnaker pole. It's the same space. And honestly, I just put the dinghy on top of it and that's how I store it. But you could tie it down to your foredeck or up against your life rails or something like that for a shortish amount of time. If I need to store it for a longer amount of time, I will take the struts out and fold the cloth up and put that away, and then I have a place where I can store the struts. You have to work all that out. So, you're ready to put it up. It's really pretty simple. I put it on top of the boom. I unroll the cloth out with its struts in general place where it should be. I tie the foredge around the mast. I retain the back edge to where it retains to. Then we go out and we tie down all of these downward lines. And we know how high it should be by just standing there. We tie the knots. Everything's floppy and just there. And then finally we hook a halyard onto the halyard harness, crank it up it goes, and everything just pulls tight. A little wiggle here to get it the way we want it, and it's done. It's a very quick process.
Here aboard Temptress, we like to do pretty much everything ourselves, but a lot of people do hire out their canvas work, and that's okay. However, the Bimini and the Dodger, those are really specialized things, and they really have to fit exactly right. And those people are used to making Bimini and Dodgers. They kind of know the drill. They show up, they'll measure your boat, they'll make it, and it'll be great. An awning is a little bit more free-flowing, a little more open to interpretation, so you could just have somebody come aboard and make an awning for you, but you don't really know what you're going to get. It's good to put in the time, even if you're not going to be sewing the darn thing, to be able to design it so that you can give somebody else the pattern so that they can sew it for you. But rest assured that this is an easy enough project that you can do yourself, and it's easy for a few reasons. The first one is it doesn't have to be exact. Because of the way we have this type of awning rigged, it's all one solid piece and you have all these rigging points, so you can really adjust it every time and sort of tailor it when it goes up to make sure it fits the boat right. Also, an awning is something that if you want it longer, you just cut one end and you seam on some more fabric and you figure out the rigging. If you want it smaller, you can lop off part of it and just put a hem in it. It's not rocket surgery, as Clark would say. It's an easy enough thing to do. It's not like a super tailored dress or something complicated like that. Also, the seams on your awning don't have to be perfect. It's 6 feet in the air. Most people aren't going to be looking at your awning and staring at your perfect stitching. So we've got some pretty shoddy stitching in different places. As long as it's strong, it'll hold up, it's good. So now we're at that DIY part of the video. How do you actually make one of these for your own boat? We're going to walk you through kind of 5 steps here. First, you're going to define your need. What kind of awning do you want? How big does it need to be? Where can you attach it? Those sorts of things. The next thing you're going to do is measure your boat. And once you have those measurements, you're going to be able to diagram and sketch out what your awning is going to look like. Then you're going to gather all the materials you need, and we'll walk you through how to make good choices about those things. And then finally, you're going to make it. Even if you have somebody else who's going to do the actual making it part, actual sewing of the awning, you can walk through these first 4 parts yourself and come along with us. So over to Clark.
So let's look at what makes a good awning. A good awning increases your usable space. You can have a party on your deck. Everybody's in nice shade and comfortable. I once threw a party on Temptress and I had 20-some people, and the reason why that's significant, it was in Mexico, it was hot as hell, and we had had a beach party with no shade. Someone had said, boy, I wish we could have this in shade, and I said, well, let's do the next one on Temptress, and everybody's response was, you can't fit 20 people on your boat. Well, we did, and it was perfectly comfortable because the awning is huge and people could walk around under it. Another important quality of a good awning, vital, is it has to be durable. You have to be able to leave it up when the wind blows a bit. This one is up routinely in this bay in 25 knots of wind. It's not a problem. In fact, when we had COVID last winter and I was sick as a dog, I didn't even think about the awning. We had storms go through. It was just fine. It was just part of the boat. 30 is the line where I take it down. If the forecast is 30 or above, I tear it down. But otherwise, I leave it up. If you have an awning that can't take 15 knots of wind, you're going to constantly be taking it down and putting it up and hating it. A good awning needs to be rigged so that it doesn't chafe when it does vibrate. It needs to be able to just not destroy itself on its tie-down points. And of course, a good awning will look good and you'll have a place to store it, and you can put it down when you're not using it and put it up easily when you do need it. On Temptress, when we're in a hot place, once we get anchored down, the very next thing to happen is up goes the awning. So it needs to be easy to take down and store. Now we're going to measure up the boat so we can make an awning that fits this boat. I'm going to measure between the aft intermediate shrouds because that's the front corner of how I hold the awning in place. I've run a rope right across here. You'll see why in a minute, but our first measurement is to measure how far between the shrouds. Thank you, Emily. And I'm measuring the size of the awning at the attachment points where the awning will fit. If you made it a little short, you could always use some string or something to attach it. If you make it too big, you're going to have to just modify the awning and make it smaller, of course. And I get 9 foot 2 inches. Next measurement we need to know is how long is the awning. Emily's going to take the tape back, and I'm going to measure 2 different lengths here, right across from the attachment point, and then I'm in a weird situation where I wanted this to come a bit further forward. Now that normally wouldn't be supported well, but I have a lot of little intermediate areas to connect that on. Okay, this is 19 foot 6 inches, and this is 1 more foot. So we've got that. I'm doing all this measurement with the awning up. Of course you couldn't do this, but I think leaving the awning up lets you see what I'm measuring, you know, what's above what I'm doing. In my installation, I have these nice places to run lines forward, and I can retain this edge quite well. Because of that, I've decided to make my awning have a curve to the front, a little harder to maintain, and honestly it does move in the wind more than the last awning that had a straight line across. But it was something I experimented with. Because of that, that's why I make that measurement forward from the line between the shrouds. You don't have to do this on yours. It's your awning. Set it up any way you think is right. Now I'm going to get the width of the back edge. In this case, we're coming up to this solar arch, and we're actually using that to maintain and hold the back of the awning. This is 6 foot 2. I've already measured it. I built it. I kind of know how big it is. This is probably uncommon. Your boat probably doesn't have a convenient solar arch, though if you have davits or something like that, you can use these. What I did with the earlier awning, the awning I had before I had this arch, is I brought the awning back to the backstay. Backstays are always a good solid place to attach to. And I made the awning end in a pocket, and then I put a strut in the pocket. I retained the center line of the awning to the backstay rigidly, and then the 2 outer sides were just down lines that basically just kept it from teeter-tottering. Now that we know the length of our awning, we can make a guesstimate or a decision on how many panels we're going to use. The cloth is either 60 inch in the case of this cloth, or 52, I believe. Decide what cloth you're going to buy, and that might be appropriate to your boat's length, and how many panels you're going to have. So in our case, 1, 2, 3, 4 panels is convenient to make up that distance. So that means I need 3 intermediate struts. Now the strut width should come, in my opinion, a little wider than your boat, but not so much wider than your boat that if you had your awning up and you went into a marina, you'd clip pilings or something. But wider is nice because then the water goes off and the sun doesn't come on quite as much. I've already measured this. The first one is 12 foot 2, then 13 foot 2, 10 foot 2, and that's all the measurements we need. Now let's go down and drop an awning. Okay, let's draw this awning out. We know that it is 19 feet and 6 inches long to a point between the lower aft intermediate shrouds that is 9 foot 2 inches wide. We know in my case it goes forward 1 more foot. We know that we are going to have 3 struts, and the struts, I chose 3 because I'm using material that's 60 inches long, and if I attach the 60-inch material with a double over seam, kind of like the inside seam on a pair of denim jeans, 3 struts gives me enough overall at 60 inches per to have it work out. The first one is 12 foot 2 inches. The next one is 13 feet 2 inches. The next one is 10 foot 2 inches. And the final one is 6 foot 2 inches. It might seem they all came out to a very convenient length. They're all 2 inches. Well, a lot of that probably had to do when I first measured it. The front one is 9 foot 2 inches. The back one had to be 6 foot 2 inches. But the others could be arbitrary, depending on how long I wanted them. So I think I just started a trend as I was measured and rounded to 2 inches. Between each of these stations, you're going to be cutting the cloth in a unique way. You don't want to cut it straight across. If you were to cut it straight across, it would flop in the wind. It's hard to get that tight. But if you cut it, hollow cut it's called, so it just comes in a little bit like that, you'll find that when you pull it tight, it gets very tight in that station. If you look up at your mainsail, between your battens, you'll see that your mainsail was cut that way by your sailmaker. That's what keeps it from fluttering. So each of these will be hollow cut. To do a hollow cut for something like an awning, it's not exactly critical. So a hollow cut is a line that you cut the cloth to that comes in from the straight line that would be cut if you just made a trapezoid shape. And I cut in about 2.5 inches over this span. So each of these was just done by marking a point 2.5 inches in and then making a nice tapered line that joined everything together. Now once you've got this drawn out, we need to add some webbing. We're going to be pulling this very strongly in this direction. So I call for webbing right down the center line. The front edge is unsupported, so I call for webbing right across the front edge. And in my case, across the back edge. That lets me attach it to my solar arch. If you don't have a solar arch back there and you're only attaching it to the backstay in the center, instead of webbing, you'll make a pocket and put a strut in there with a way to tie it down on the corners. Now let's calculate how much material we're going to need for this project. Now, you got to make sure you have enough, of course. Last thing you want is to have a couple yards too short. You don't want a huge amount over because it's not terribly cheap, though we've got a way to get it a little bit cheaper. At the very most, to cut out this panel, you would need 12 foot 2 inches plus seam allowance. This panel would need 13.2, this would need 10.2, because that's the major dimension of each of these panels. You need a little extra cloth to do this front section if you do it that way, but most likely you'll just stop on a straight line. You actually need a little less cloth than that, because if you can imagine this piece, if I cut it out of the same bolt that this is on, if I moved it up and flipped it over, the trapezoids kind of fit into each other. So that saves you a couple of feet each. Once adding all these numbers up though, and coming up with a conservative number, I came up with 14 yards of material. We actually bought 15 if I remember correctly, and we had plenty left over for the bits and bobs that are required for this project, plus we made the scoop for the forward hatch. That we did a video on that a while ago. Beyond cloth, you're going to need webbing, and you're going to need quite a large amount. You need about 20 feet in my case to go down the center line. You're going to need about 10 feet across the front and 6 feet across the back. So that's 36 feet. So, 40 feet of webbing and you should be good. Of course, your mileage may vary. Do this to your own drawing. Now that we've drawn it all out, let's talk about the bill of materials. What do we need to buy to do this project?
First off, we need fabric. If you want this thing to last any significant period of time and you're going to have it up any significant amount of time, you're going to want Sunbrella. We normally recommend generic stuff whenever you can, but Sunbrella is something you shouldn't skip on. The problem with Sunbrella is you're not going to find cheap prices online because there's a minimum price that they're required to advertise it at when you sell Sunbrella, so you got to go kind of behind the scenes to get it. If you're one of our patrons, you probably already know this. If you want to know, become a patron and send us a message and we will hook you up with our friend who can get you some cheaper Sunbrella. Can you use an old sail? Yes, but it's going to be really loud, and there's a reason we put sail covers on sails. They break down in the sun, so using an old sail isn't the greatest solution, even if you can get a bunch of free fabric. You don't want to use something like nylon. I mean, you could, if you're a day sailor and you just want something to be able to go anchor somewhere and hang something up, you could use a really light nylon, like they make those hammocks out of, and it would crunch up into a nice little ball. It'd be great. But again, if you want this to last any significant period of time, go for Sunbrella. What colors should you get? What patterns should you get? This is something to think about. If you're going to be joining up pieces together, maybe you don't want to get stripes that you have to worry about the spacing of the stripes or the pattern or anything like that. A good solid color is always great. The color of dirt and rust is our choice because we know that our awning is going to get dirty. We know our lifestyle isn't super neat and tidy. So if you put a nice white awning up and then you get some piece of rust on it, you're going to hate that rust stain. So something that's going to hold up well over time. The other thing to think about is this is a big fabric purchase. This is a lot of fabric, probably the most fabric you would ever buy for almost anything on your boat, unless you're going to actually cover your entire boat in fabric. So you're going to have some scraps left over. So you can make a cover for your propane can, you can make a cover for your wheel, you could upholster cushions with it, you can do lots of things with Sunbrella, and it's going to hold up. It's good fabric. So make a choice of something that is going to be easy to use for a lot of applications. The next thing you need is good thread. Again, don't skimp on the thread because then you're going to have to just redo all the seams in a couple years, and nobody wants to do that. It's better to buy these good, expensive Gore-Tex type thread, and you can get some of this in all of this stuff actually, on our Amazon store. We've got a link where you can find the products. You can shop for them elsewhere, but the names of them and the specs are there so that it's easy for you to find them. Get some good thread. You're going to want some webbing, like what seatbelts are made out of. We use that in the front edge, the back edge, and all down the center line of the awning. So we have those measurements. You can calculate how much you need for that, and our wholesale guy can hook you up with webbing as well. You're probably going to want some grommets in order to attach this to your boat. There might be clips and other fancy things that you use to attach, but grommets are a great way to put a nice hole in a piece of cloth without it ripping out. Make sure you get good grommets. Don't get steel grommets, get brass grommets or chrome-plated brass grommets. You take a magnet to them, make sure they're not crappy steel, because then you're just going to have a rusty, terrible mess in very short time. You're going to need the material for your struts, so we use 1.5 inch aluminum pipe for that, and then we have a wooden part that goes in the end that we've carved ourselves. You could also use wooden dowling, as Clark suggested before. Do not use PVC pipe for this. It's going to not provide enough structure. It's going to be floppy, and over time with the heat it actually turns into kind of a Willy Wonka Dr. Seuss looking shape. So don't use that. Get some good wooden or metal poles for this. For the down rigging, we used 550 paracord line. Looking back, it's a little bit too fine. We bought a lot of it, so we're going to continue using it and just replacing them every year or so. But if you wanted it to hold up, get something a little more significant than that. For your leach line, which is important for making this fit and collecting rainwater and those sorts of things, you can use any sort of really fine line. You will want to be able to pull it, so you want it something that's going to be durable. We used ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, which is also available in our Amazon store. You're going to need a good sewing machine for this. A lot of people swear by Sailrights. We don't have one. Clark used to have one. He got rid of it and he got something called a Nietzsche, which is a pretty affordable alternative. We can put a link to that in the description. It might be in our Amazon store if it's available. But get a good heavy-duty sewing machine. You're going to be sewing through sometimes 4 or 5 layers of Sunbrella, so it really needs to be tough, and you don't want to stop your project every 5 minutes to replace a needle or do something like that. Get a good sewing machine, or again, hire somebody else to do this once you have your plan. It's also going to be useful to have a hot knife. We have a soldering iron hot knife that's butane powered. That's really nice. We'll put that in the Amazon store as well. That's really good for putting holes through that synthetic type fabric. Once you have all the stuff, then you can start construction.
So now it's time to actually sew this up. I took some footage when I was building this awning, so I'm going to talk over my old sewing time. The first job is find a big place and stretch out your cloth. You're going to want to cut out all those large trapezoids from your drawing. Make sure you allow for seam allowance, so once you fold it in the hem, you've got enough material to make the finished size that you had measured. Each of the exposed edges, each of the triangular edges, they're going to need to be hollow cut about 2.5 inches in from a straight line. Once you've got all your panels cut out, you can sew them together. Use a double seam, kind of like the seam on a pair of denim jeans. That's good and strong. Then hem the outside edges. Put the leech line inside before you roll up the fabric, and roll up the fabric and sew around it. It's a little bit odd and it'll be a little tiny bit wrinkled because of that hollow cut, but don't let that bother you. No one's going to look at this awning right up inches away. You're not making a fancy dress here. Then you want to make the strut pockets. The strut pockets are just rectangles from your scrap material. They have two jobs. They hold the awning on the strut, but they also provide one of the grommeted positions for the strut line to go through and pull outward. Because of that, they have to be fairly long and sewn very strongly into the main awning. At least 2 foot would be a good amount. Then you want to sew on your webbing. I sew the webbing under the Sunbrella, so the webbing is protected from the sun. I believe the Sunbrella is more durable in the sun than the nylon webbing, so I do it this way. You need one webbing that runs the whole length of the awning right down the actual center line. Measure this and mark this. You don't want this wavering. And you're going to need a piece of webbing across the front edge, and in my case, I need one across the back edge. Remember, if your back edge isn't supported by something like my solar arch, you're going to have a strut in there. So instead of having webbing and grommets, you will very likely have a pocket that you can put a small piece of strut in. Then add grommets. You're going to need a grommet at every batten pocket above and below. You're going to need grommets above every strut on the center line for the halyards to pull up on this thing. For your front edge, you're going to need at least one stout grommet on the center line, and for any other attachment points that you have. On the back edge, again, you'll need one stout grommet in the middle and whatever other attachment points you need. And you may also choose to add some grommets for water collection. I have found over the years that it's important to reinforce the cloth at this point before you add these grommets. But I have to say I didn't do it this time. I will be taking the awning down and I will be fixing this. Do it right the first time. Don't be like Clark. To make the struts, you want to cut them to length and add whatever is necessary at the tips to give it a nice chafe-free way of turning the line back around on itself. Remember that the overall strut has to be wider than the awning at that point for the approach that I use to work well. I find that just taking a piece of wood, I had some mahogany laying around, cutting it down to the basic shape, and then I carved it with an angle grinder into a round shape I could put inside the tubing, and cut a little edge at the end and kind of made them somewhat aesthetically pleasing. Was very easy to do. And over the years, I've tried a lot of things, and honestly, that works the best. If on your boat it's going to be difficult to store these struts, if you use aluminum tubing, you could cut the strut in half and put some kind of a plug in so that you can disassemble them. There's no outward force on these struts. There's only a compressive load, so you don't have to fasten it in any way. It doesn't want to come apart. If you use a wooden solid strut, you could have a piece of aluminum tubing that's bigger than the wood, and you could use that to put them together. Now to rig your awning. You're going to need down lines, I call them. And these are the lines that go from the awning out around the end of the strut, back to the strut pocket, and then down to whatever you tie them down to. Most likely your lifelines. You're going to need one of those for the end of every strut. Then you're going to need a harness that can raise the thing up. And that goes through that center line webbing at every strut and ties off to the strut. Just a loop around the strut and back up again. I have the actual harness done with clip-ons at the end so that I can remove it very easily, and just little rings of line that go up to be clipped into. If you only need 2 lifting points, if you only have 2 struts, then you can just have a V of line that goes to your halyard and you're done. If you need more struts than 2, it's important that you keep it balanced. By balance, I mean, if you were to use 3 struts like I do, and you only had 3 lines coming down, what would happen is half the load would go to 1 strut, the other half would be split amongst the other 2 struts. And that would cause an imbalance and you'd never be able to get your awning level. Easy way to solve this is to rig it for 4 lines and just take the 4th line and hook it to something solid. I hook it to the very back of my awning where it hooks to the solar arch. It's not going to lift that up very far, and that works really well. You're going to need various lines and clips to attach the forward edge, the back edge, hooking it in my case to the lower intermediate shrouds. Whatever you need in your case, you're just going to have to figure out, put a grommet in, and tie it down. There are some coatings you might want to put on an awning like this that would protect it from the sun and would keep it waterproof longer and generally give it a longer life. I find that the 3M product Scotchgard has gotten prohibitively expensive and I just don't use it anymore. Another choice is not something that's really designed for cloth, but I tried it this time and it worked out okay. It was Thompson's Water Seal, something you'll find in the hardware store. I painted it on and I got some that was somewhat tinted. That's why the top of our awning has this kind of speckle look, as it were, not exactly smooth. It'll stiffen the cloth significantly, but that doesn't bother me. My awning's up most all the time. And I found it worked pretty good and it was actually very cheap. Other products, there's something called 303 Fabric Guard that's very good. It's not so much a waterproofing, it's more of a sunscreen for cloth. And I don't think it's terribly cheap. What I have found that is a good waterproofing and is quite cheap is a water protection from a company called Mary Kate. And I've used that with good effect without breaking the bank. We'll put a link to that in our Amazon store, so you can always check there for stuff that we've liked over the years. Maintenance of an awning, well, it's cloth. If you get a hole in it or a tear in it, you sew a patch on it. It's pretty straightforward. Watch your lines, they'll chafe possibly, and you might have to replace them. But otherwise, this is pretty easy to keep good. It's not like a sail where everything is just absolutely needs to be perfect and the geometries need to be right to keep the airfoil. This is a little more forgiving, and you're working with Sunbrella, which is stretchier than sailcloth. So once you've made a change, if you see a little pucker, leave it up for a couple days. It very likely will kind of stretch into shape and make it look like you knew what you were doing the first time. If you decide to collect rainwater from your awning, where the tubing starts from the cloth, what I found that works really well and is very inexpensive, get the big grommet, I believe it's a number 0, get plastic or nylon hose barbs that go to 1/4 inch threaded fittings on one side. Heat it up really well with a heat gun so it kind of starts to flow. And you shove it through the grommet. And on the other side, you have some kind of a mandrel to push against it. Don't touch it with your hands, it's going to be hot. And kind of make it mushroom out a little bit. It doesn't stand too high, the water can go down. When you have the hose attached, that pulls just down enough that it causes a little divot there that will let the water collect and start the process going. And if you don't have the hose attached, the little hose barb is so light that it doesn't really affect the awning much.
Thanks so much for watching this video. We hope that this gives you some tips and tricks and maybe some inspiration to create your own awning that's perfect for your boat. Thank you to the patrons who have requested this video. We know it's been a long time coming. I think a year ago somebody requested this video and we've been thinking about how are we going to do this for quite some time. If you have questions about how this process works, go ahead and leave them in the comments. We do try to answer every single thing that comes in through the comment section. And if you want one-on-one help with designing or equipping your boat or whatever you'd like to do, join Patreon. We have a level where you can call us and we will video chat with you, look at your electrical wiring, whatever you want to do with your boat, and give you some one-on-one help. So that's available as well. As always, give this video a like and please subscribe to our channel and share our stuff. It helps us grow. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.